Tiana sat frozen at her desk, her face burning as the girls behind her laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. A voice she trusted, her teacher, chuckled under her breath and said, "Let's keep our opinions to ourselves," as if Tiana's dignity was a distraction, not a duty. But then the door opened, and in walked a woman in a red blazer, heels echoing like justice across tile, dreadlocks coiled like armor, eyes sharp as glass. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Because the moment she spoke, the entire classroom realized they weren't in charge of the lesson anymore. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Tiana Brooks was the kind of girl who noticed everything and said almost nothing. She was 10, soft-spoken, with a deep brown gaze that looked older than her years. Her mother said her eyes carried memory. And when she sat for hours on a pillow at her mother's knees, the hum of gospel in the background and the scent of coconut oil filling the room, she didn't fidget or sigh. She knew that braiding was more than grooming. It was storytelling. Line by line, her mother's hands wove patience and legacy into her scalp. But Ridgeview Elementary didn't see all that. On Monday, she came to school with lemon-colored beads at the end of box braids, the tips dancing near her shoulders like chimes. As she stepped into room 12, conversation dimmed. Not stopped, dimmed. Like the class had collectively turned the volume down, just enough for her to feel it. Mrs. Atkins didn't look up from her attendance sheet. She rarely did when Tiana entered. Tiana took her seat. Back row, second from the window. That's where Mrs. Atkins always placed her. Close enough to keep an eye on, far enough not to be heard. In front of her, 3 girls exchanged glances and poorly stifled giggles. "Are those beads heavy?" one whispered, not really whispering. "I heard they give you headaches," said another. "I bet her mom makes her wear them so people will look at her." Then came the tug, a sudden sharp yank on one of the braids. "Are these even real?" Tiana's scalp stung. Her heart didn't race. It sank. She didn't turn around. She didn't say a word. Mrs. Atkins, seated at her desk beneath a motivational poster about kindness, continued grading math quizzes. If she heard, she didn't act. If she saw, she chose not to see. That day at lunch, Tiana didn't go to the cafeteria. She took her sandwich to the far end of the playground, where the tree roots tangled like fingers and no one bothered her. She pressed her back against the bark, staring at the threadbare tips of her laces, her untouched sandwich beside her. She wasn't angry, not yet. She was just tired of being talked over, of being stared at like a problem, of carrying her culture like it was something that needed to be excused. She didn't know that miles away, her mother, Marlene Brooks, had taken a call from the school counselor, and as she listened to the vague, careful wording, she noticed her daughter's slumped walk replaying in her mind. The way Tiana had stopped humming during braiding, the silence that lingered too long after school. And Marlene? She was already planning the conversation that would shake the building, not with shouting, but with truth and presence. The gold thread shimmered in the morning light as Tiana adjusted her crown braid in the mirror. It coiled like a halo across her head, her mother's hands having woven it with purpose and precision the night before. "You don't hide your light for anyone," Marlene had said, tying off the last twist like a seal. "You walk in there with your chin up. And if they try you again, baby, they'll learn what happens when silence ends." Still, Tiana hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the braids as if they could shield her from the day ahead. But she didn't pull them down. She didn't undo the crown. She walked into room 12, chin lifted half an inch higher than the day before. The projector hummed at the front of the class. A black-and-white documentary flickered on the screen, narrating the history of invention or discovery. She didn't know which. Her desk waited, empty and familiar, like a place that had learned to accept being last. She didn't make it halfway before the comment started. "Look, it's Princess Tangled again," someone whispered behind a cupped hand. "I bet she doesn't even wash that stuff," another said, louder. "She must think she's better than us." And then, twisting the knife, "No wonder her mom never shows up." A few students snickered. Mrs. Atkins didn't pause the documentary. She didn't stand, didn't scold. She just let out a breathy chuckle, the kind meant to soften cruelty into something palatable. "Let's keep our opinions to ourselves," she murmured, not looking up. Tiana froze in her seat. Her breath sat tight in her throat. She pressed her hands flat against the desk, fingers splayed like roots trying to dig into something, anything, stable. The heat in her face wasn't just shame anymore. It was fury, locked behind her teeth. And then the door creaked open. The hinge groaned like the air itself was holding its breath. Marlene Brooks stepped in. Red blazer, high heels, dreadlocks pinned into a neat bun, gold hoops glinting under fluorescent light. She didn't storm. She arrived. Each step across the linoleum was deliberate, not loud, but final. She looked straight at Mrs. Atkins, then at every student in the room. Tiana's heart dropped, then lifted. Her mother was here. Calmly, Marlene folded her hands in front of her. "The principal said I could speak to the class," she said. "I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about respect, what it looks like, what it doesn't." The room held its breath. Mrs. Atkins blinked. No one moved. Tiana turned slightly in her seat, and for the first time all year, she felt the heat of 100 eyes, not because they were mocking her, but because someone was finally seeing her. And the silence that followed, it didn't feel like erasure. It felt like power preparing to speak. Marlene Brooks didn't pace the room. She didn't gesture wildly or demand attention. She simply walked to the front of the class and pulled a chair beside her daughter. The sound of the legs scraping the tile was louder than anything said all morning. Then she sat. Calm. Certain. Present. She rested her hands on her knees, turned to face the room full of wide-eyed students, and spoke in a tone that felt like both a lullaby and a warning. "This is my daughter. Her name is Tiana." She placed a hand gently on Tiana's shoulder. The girl sat frozen, eyes wide, unsure if this was real or just some impossible daydream conjured by a heart too tired. "She is not a problem. She is not a distraction. And she is not here to make anyone else feel comfortable by shrinking herself." Her voice never rose, but it filled every inch of the room. "And these braids?" She lifted one of the gold-threaded strands. "Do you know what goes into this?" Her eyes met a boy in the front row who quickly looked down. "It takes hours. It takes patience. It takes hands that know more than just styling. Hands that remember. My grandmother braided my hair. Her mother braided hers. This isn't just fashion. It's history. It's heritage. It's identity, woven into every part of who we are." Mrs. Atkins shifted in her seat. Marlene turned to her without blinking. "And when you laugh at that identity, even quietly, even by ignoring it, you're not just mocking a child's hair. You're mocking generations. You're mocking resilience. You're teaching cruelty instead of kindness." A pause. Then, evenly, "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm not even here to scold." She looked around the room. Several students couldn't meet her gaze. "But let me be perfectly clear," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "If my daughter comes home one more time feeling ashamed of who she is because of this classroom, I won't be back here to talk. I'll be back with a lawyer." Mrs. Atkins opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her complexion had turned a stark shade of gray. The air in the room was taut, like a string pulled to its breaking point. Tiana sat perfectly still. But inside, something shifted. Something real. Not the collapse of fear, but the birth of safety. It was the feeling of being defended not with noise, but with truth. And in that moment, for the first time, Tiana didn't feel like the girl they whispered about. She felt seen, protected. She felt powerful. Change didn't arrive with applause. It arrived in small, quiet moments, steady as rain on pavement, impossible to ignore. The day after Mrs. Brooks visited the classroom, Tiana noticed the difference. Mrs. Atkins, who once treated her like background noise, suddenly found time to pause beside her desk. "Beautiful penmanship," she said, placing a sticker on Tiana's worksheet like it was something she'd always done. But her voice trembled just slightly, like someone trying to rewrite a chapter too late. The girls in the back row? They didn't stop whispering overnight, but the snickers dulled. The questions softened. One of them, Kaylee, the one who had once yanked on Tiana's braid during math, waited behind after lunch and asked, "Do you think your mom could show me how to do those?" Tiana blinked, unsure whether to laugh or walk away, but instead she nodded. "Maybe." By the end of the week, the school counselor had sent a note home asking if Mrs. Brooks would consider speaking at the upcoming diversity assembly. She did. She told the whole auditorium that respect is taught, and so is silence. And you could hear the way students shifted in their seats, some out of discomfort, some out of realization. That led to a panel, then a story time event in the library, then an article in the district newsletter titled, "What One Mother Taught Us All." Tiana watched it all unfold like someone watching their shadow bloom into sunlight. She started walking taller, speaking louder. She raised her hand more. She stopped hesitating before recess and began sitting with other girls, not behind them, but beside them. She didn't just braid hair anymore. She taught the younger ones how to braid confidence into every twist. The story followed her long after she left Ridgeview Elementary. It followed her to high school, where she started a Black Student Alliance Club before there was even funding. It followed her to college, where she studied childhood education and wrote essays about the intersections of visibility and voice. And years later, in a cap and gown, on a university stage, Tiana stood behind a podium, hands steady, eyes scanning the crowd. "My story almost started with silence," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But it was saved by someone who walked into a room and reminded the world that I belonged." In the front row, her mother sat tall, her hair braided tight, beads clicking softly in the quiet, catching the light like fire.